Some miracles don't arrive with thunder or trumpets or flashing lights. Some arrive quietly, half-frozen, broken, on the edge of a lonely road where no one was supposed to pass. Some appear only when a heart is so shattered there's nothing left to lose. This is the story of a horse who waited in the snow and the man who believed he had nothing left worth saving. Winter had settled heavily over Wyoming that year, a winter that felt longer than any that came before it, not measured in storms or inches of snowfall, but in silence. The kind that swallowed a house whole. The kind that seeped through doors and window frames and into bone. The kind that followed a man wherever he walked, clinging to him like frost clings to branches long after the storm has passed. Thomas Avery lived alone now. Alone on the ranch built by his hands and his father's hands before him. Alone since the night the world split open and swallowed the only person who ever knew how to quiet the storms inside him. His wife Clara gone in a breath, a heartbeat, the instant a hospital hallway swallowed the sound of machines going still. He stopped counting days after that, stopped speaking to neighbors, stopped brushing the dust from photos in wooden frames, stopped looking at the sunrise because light no longer meant morning, only proof that time continued without care for the ruins it left behind. The ranch, once alive with motion and warmth, had gone silent. The barn doors creaked in the wind. Fence lines sagged under the weight of snow. Fields stretched endless and white, untouched by hoof or boot. Time didn't pass there. It simply settled, heavy and unmoving, like grief. The night it happened, the wind had risen without warning. Snow swept across the plains like a tide, swallowing everything in white. Trees bent under the weight. Electric lines hummed like ghost voices. The storm raged against the windows of Thomas's house, shaking the glass like fists demanding to be let in. He sat in his old armchair by the dying fire, eyes unfocused, breathing slow. The storm howled, but he barely heard it. Grief had a sound louder than any wind, and it had filled him long before winter arrived. Outside, lightning flashed white across the fields, revealing emptiness, and then, just for a second, something else. A shape in the distance, something moving, stumbling, collapsing. The storm swallowed it again before his eyes could confirm it. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't want to move, didn't care. He told himself that whatever was out there, a deer, a stray dog, something unlucky, nature would handle it. Nature always did. Life and death made their own decisions. The world continued regardless. He closed his eyes. But then the wind shifted, and through the roar he thought he heard something, a sound thin and cracked, like a cry buried under snow. A sound like someone calling for help from a place far away. His eyes opened, his heart stuttered. The sound came again, weak, nearly swallowed by the storm, but unmistakable. Something in him moved, not willingly, not fully alive, but something old and instinctive, the part of him that once rose without question when anything needed saving. A part he thought had died. He stood, joints aching, and reached for his coat. The air stabbed his lungs as he stepped outside, snow slashing sideways, stinging his face. The storm swallowed every direction, erasing the horizon into nothing. But the sound came again. He followed it. Boots sank deep with every step, wind pushing back hard enough to knock breath from his chest. He pushed on anyway, head lowered, one hand over his brow to shield his eyes. Then he saw it, a shape collapsed across the road where the snow had drifted high, unmoving except for the faint rise and fall of breath. A horse, white as the storm around her, though dirt and frost clung to her coat, ribs showing, skin cracked. Legs trembling weakly as she tried and failed to lift herself. She wasn't dead, not yet, but close enough that death seemed impatient. Her mane was tangled in ice, her eyelashes frozen shut. Her body shook violently, muscles spasming with cold and exhaustion. Snow collected along her spine, burying her like the earth was trying to claim her. Thomas stared. He felt the instinct to turn back, to let nature choose, to believe that every struggle did not need to be his to bear. He had nothing left to give, nothing left to save with. He was an empty well, and yet something caught his eye. Around her neck, half buried in her tangled mane, a thin rope hung, frayed and worn. Attached to the rope was a small wooden tag, carved by hand, letters rough but unmistakable. Clara. His breath froze in his throat, sharper than the wind. For a moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The world stopped, the storm noise, the wind, the sting in his bones. Everything collapsed inward into that one word. Clara, his wife's name, his dead wife's name, carved in wood. Around the neck of a dying horse lying in the snow on a night he wasn't meant to be outside. Coincidence should have been the answer, but something deeper moved beneath the surface, something that felt like footsteps approaching from the other side of grief. The mare turned her head slowly, as if sensing his stare. She opened her eyes, eyes pale and clouded like winter sky, eyes filled with something beyond fear, something like pleading. And in that gaze he saw himself, the same emptiness, the same exhaustion, the same question. Why keep breathing when the world has already ended? His knees weakened, his breath shuddered. He could walk away and no one would know. He could turn back to the silence waiting in his house. He could leave the broken creature to the storm and pretend nothing had happened. But he didn't. Something inside him, maybe the part Clara once protected, made the decision for him. He knelt in the snow beside her, feeling the cold sink into bone. He placed a trembling hand against her neck. Her skin felt like ice. Her heartbeat fluttered beneath his palm, weak, frantic, desperate, a heartbeat refusing to quit. He slipped his arms beneath her neck and shoulder, muscles screaming as he lifted. She was heavier than she looked, dead weight against his chest. His legs wobbled, pain shooting through his spine, but he did not let go. Step by step, breath by breath, he dragged her toward the house, snow swallowing their tracks behind them. Wind battered them, but the mare pressed her head against his shoulder, trusting him with the last strength she possessed. Together they reached the barn. He lowered her onto the straw, collapsing beside her, chest burning, arms numb. Her breath came slow and shallow, eyes half closed. She was dying, and he did not know why saving her mattered, only that it did. The storm howled around them, rattling the barn doors like fists. The lantern flickered weakly, throwing shadows against the wooden walls. Her heartbeat trembled beneath his hand. For the first time in months he spoke aloud, not to her, not to anyone living, but to whatever unseen force had carried this moment to him through wind and snow. The only response was the sound of the wind, the groaning wood, the fragile rhythm of breath fighting darkness. She would not last the night without help, and he would not survive losing her now that she had appeared. He rose and began the long, painful work of keeping her alive. And as he worked, time shifted, grief loosening its grip, something unrecognizable taking its place. Something like purpose, something like the first crack of sunlight beneath a door long sealed. The storm raged through the night, beating its fists against the barn walls like a living thing. Wind screamed through gaps in the old timber, rattling hinges and shaking the lantern light into frantic, trembling shadows. Inside, the cold crept through every crack and seam, settling deep into bones and memories. Thomas worked with the silent desperation of someone who no longer knew where strength came from, only that he could not stop. He dragged heavy blankets from the tack room and layered them over the mare's shivering body. He filled buckets with warm water from the kitchen stove and soaked old towels, laying them across her neck and chest. Steam curled upward in thin ribbons, dissolving into the frozen air. Her breathing scraped like sandpaper, uneven and raw. Every exhale sounded like surrender, every inhale like a fight she was slowly losing. Her body trembled uncontrollably, muscles firing against death's creeping grip. Hours passed without measure. The lantern burned low, its glass fogged with cold breath. His hands numbed from overuse, fingertips split and bleeding, but he did not stop, not when his knees buckled, not when his back screamed. Not when the memories, sharp and merciless, filled the barn like smoke. He remembered sitting beside Clara's hospital bed, holding her hand while her pulse weakened beneath his thumb. The helplessness, the silence. The feeling that life had slipped beyond reach, no matter how tightly he held on. He remembered the last breath leaving her body, quiet, almost tender, while the world outside continued without pause. The world that had not broken with him, but tonight felt different. Tonight there was still a pulse beneath his hand, still a chance, however small, still a battle not yet lost. At some point near dawn, the mare's trembling began to ease. Her breath steadied to something fragile but rhythmic. Frost melted from her eyelashes. Her ears twitched weakly, responding to the shift in wind outside. Thomas leaned back against the wooden wall, exhaustion folding over him. The lantern dimmed to a soft flicker, the horizon beyond the barn door bruised purple with approaching morning. Snow continued to fall, quieter now, an exhausted storm. He closed his eyes for a moment, just long enough for sleep to steal him without warning. When he awoke, the barn was washed in pale daylight. His neck was stiff, his whole body aching from hours hunched over straw. For a moment, disorientation blurred the edges of reality, storm, cold, breath, heartbeat, until the sound beside him pulled the world back into focus. Breathing, steady breathing, he turned. The mare lay still, but her head was raised off the ground, weak, trembling, but lifted. Her eyes were open now, clear and watchful, pale blue, almost translucent, reflecting the cold morning light like ice over deep water. She looked at him with a strange intensity, not fear, not confusion, something deeper. Recognition, maybe, or something close enough to make his throat tighten. His hand brushed the wooden tag around her neck, the one he had seen in the storm but had been too stunned to examine closely. The rope was old, fibers frayed, stiff with frost. The tag itself was worn smooth, edges rounded like something carried for years. The letters, rough and uneven, were carved by hand. Clara. He traced the wood with his thumb. The letters were unmistakable, the same shape, the same slope, exactly the way his wife had written her name when she carved it into the cedar post they placed at the ranch gate the day they married. The same lettering she burned into the handle of the first lasso she ever braided. The same style he had memorized long before he realized he would never see her hands move again. He closed his eyes, breath trembling. Coincidence had sharp edges, but this cut was too deep to dismiss. The mare blinked slowly, watching him, steady, quiet, unafraid. Something in the stillness between them shifted, not loud, not sudden, but like a thread pulled loose in a tightly woven fabric, changing everything without sound. Outside, snow fell gently, the storm finally passed. Time moved again, but differently than before. The following days formed a rhythm, not measured by clocks or schedules, but by survival. Thomas worked to rebuild the mare's strength, warm mash fed by hand, slow stretches, short walks through the barn aisle supported by slings and patience. She never resisted, never panicked, never showed the wild fear or confusion most half-starved horses carried. Instead, she watched him, always as if she knew him, as if she had waited for him. At night, when wind moaned through the rafters, she would lift her head before the gusts arrived, sensing them long before they touched the barn walls. When the temperature dropped sharply, she would shift restlessly, hooves scraping straw, moments before the cold seeped through the boards. When coyotes approached the fence line in the dark hours before dawn, she would stand alert, muscles tense, long before their distant howls pierced the night. More than instinct, more than sensitivity, something else. There were small things too, moments that brushed against the edges of logic like feathers against skin. The lantern never went out when she watched it. He misplaced tools constantly since Clara died, but she nudged them toward him with her nose as though she knew where he would need them. Once, when his hand shook too badly to lift the bucket, she leaned her neck against his shoulder, steadying him. It should have frightened him, but instead it felt like warmth returning to a place long frozen. Every morning she grew stronger. Every night the silence grew less sharp. He started speaking again, not loudly, not conversationally, but quietly, letting words slip out like breath, telling the empty space things he hadn't said aloud in months. Talking not to be heard, but to keep from drowning in thoughts that had too long gone unsaid. She listened, not with ears, but with presence. Outside, winter held the land in a grip of ice and silence. But inside the barn, something thawed, slow, uncertain, but real. Days blurred. The mare regained weight, muscles building beneath her coat. Her mane regained its shine, white like gathered snow. She walked the aisle without shaking now, steps steady and sure. She followed him closely, not like a rescued animal, but like something connected by thread instead of rope. And every time he looked at her, the same quiet thought whispered through the hollow spaces inside him. Why did she come here? Why tonight? Why him? And every time the answer felt just beyond reach, like breath visible in cold air before disappearing. One night, weeks after the storm that brought her to his door, the wind shifted suddenly, sharp and unnatural, carrying something electric beneath its howl. The mare woke from her resting place with a jolt, ears pricked, body tense, eyes burning with urgency. She moved to the barn doors and pawed hard at the wood, not random, not anxious, deliberate, insistent. Thomas felt the change before he understood it. The air grew tight, crackling with something that made every hair on his arms rise. The mare turned toward him, eyes locked on his, wide, urgent, pleading. A sound rose in the distance, faint but unmistakable, a groaning, cracking sound like beams splitting or wood collapsing under strain. The house. The realization hit like a blow. He stepped into the snow, cold burning against his skin as he ran. Smoke curled from the roof of the house, black and thick against the pale moonlight. Flames licked upward behind the living room windows, orange and violent, eating through curtains, swallowing memories. He had been asleep in that chair by the fire again. He wouldn't have woken, not in time. The mare reared behind him, striking the air, driving him forward. Her voice, sharp and raw and alive, cut through the night like a warning meant for more than ears. He ran, heat hit him like a wave as he crossed the porch, roaring, suffocating. He threw open the door long enough to grab the photograph on the mantel, the last picture of Clara laughing in the field behind the barn, and then flames forced him back. The porch buckled behind him, wood splintering, fire lunging outward like a living creature hungry for breath. The world narrowed to heat and smoke, and the pounding of blood in his ears. When he stumbled backward into snow, half blind, gasping for air, the mare was there, pressed close, breath warm on his face, steadying him as the house collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks. Together they stood in the snow and watched everything he had ever built burn. He did not cry. The tears had been gone too long. But he felt something, not the sharp agony of loss, but a strange quietness, a release, as though the fire took with it not only walls and wood and memory, but the weight that had been smothering his ribs since the night Clara died. The flames died slowly. Silence settled again, different this time, not empty, not hollow. Winter wind brushed the fields, soft and deliberate. When dawn finally climbed over the horizon, pale and exhausted, Thomas walked through the ruins of the house. Snow hissed against hot ash, charred boards crumbled beneath his boots. Smoke curled upward from the remains of what once held a lifetime. He knelt, sifting through blackened earth. And there, half buried in ash, glinting faintly in the first pale rays of morning sun, lay a small circle of gold. Clara's wedding ring. The ring that had slipped from his finger the night she died, lost in the chaos of grief, never found despite weeks of searching. The ring he assumed had vanished forever. He closed his hand around it. The mare stood beside him. The snow fell softly. The silence felt like peace. The fire smoldered through the morning, sending thin, weary threads of smoke curling into the pale winter sky. What had once been a home built board by board with hands that knew work and love in equal measure, now lay in broken ribs of blackened timber and ash. The snow fell quietly onto the ruins, soft flakes disappearing instantly against embers still too hot to hold them. Thomas stood among the remains, the cold biting at his soaked boots, the ring clenched tightly in his fist. It felt impossibly warm against his skin, as if it carried a pulse, as if it had been waiting beneath the ashes for exactly this moment, for exactly these hands. The mare stood close, her breath visible in soft clouds. She watched him with eyes that held storms and silences and something that reached beyond explanation. There was no fear in her posture, no tremble in her legs. She stood as though she had always belonged here, as though she had known he would need her long before he did. He looked at her, really looked, and something inside him shifted, slow and painful, like ice cracking under thaw. A realization reached him, not through logic, but through feeling, the deep, wordless knowing that lives in bones rather than thought. She had come the night the storm tried to bury the world. She had carried his wife's name around her neck. She had steadied his hands when they shook with grief. She had woken him the moment before the flames would have claimed him. And now, in the ruins of everything he thought he needed to hold on to, she stood with quiet certainty, as if saying the thing he had refused to hear for months. It's time to live again. The silence around them changed, no longer hollow, no longer bruised. It felt full now, stretched wide like a horizon after years of darkness. The weight on his chest eased, not because grief vanished, but because something stronger took its place. Something like acceptance, something like breath, He slipped the ring onto a leather cord he found half buried in the snow and tied it around his neck, close to his heart. The mare lowered her head, touching her muzzle gently against his shoulder, a gesture so quiet, so reverent, that it felt like prayer. For a long time they stood together, the wind whispering through the icy field, snow falling like blessings rather than burdens. Then, without warning, the mare lifted her head sharply, ears pricking forward toward the horizon. Her body shifted, muscles tensing beneath her coat, breath quickening in sharp bursts of steam. She stepped backward once, as though creating distance not from fear, but from farewell. He reached toward her, confused, instinctive, the same reflex a drowning man has reached for a rope, but she stepped back again, eyes steady, ancient, kind. She was leaving, not running, not escaping, departing the way a tide withdraws, slow, deliberate, inevitable. He wanted to call out, to ask her to stay, to demand explanation, but the words stuck in his throat, held there by the strange and powerful certainty that this was not an ending meant to be interrupted. Some goodbyes arrive in silence because silence is the only language large enough to hold them. She turned, snow swirling around her white coat like mist, and walked out across the field, steps so light they seemed to float above the earth. The rising sun cut through the clouds, spilling gold across the snow, igniting her silhouette in warm fire. For a moment she looked less like a creature of flesh and bone, and more like light wearing the shape of a horse. Her hoofprints trailed behind her, pressed deep into untouched snow, a perfect, steady path leading east toward the morning. He followed a few steps, boots sinking deep, breath shaking in the cold air. But he stopped where the fence had once stood, placing a hand against the charred post that now remained like a gravestone. The mare paused far down the field, as if sensing him one last time. She lifted her head, turned slightly, just enough for light to catch her eyes, turning them silver bright, and then she moved on. Her shape dissolved into brightness, swallowed by the sun. The field remained, the wind softened, the world exhaled. Thomas walked forward slowly, almost afraid to disturb the silence, and looked down at the snow where she had passed. Hoofprints, perfectly spaced, perfectly clear, leading toward sunrise. He followed them a few steps, boots beside hooves, and then stopped, because the tracks grew lighter, softer, fading, until the last print vanished into untouched snow, as if she had lifted off the earth entirely. There was no blood on the snow, no trail of struggle, no sign of direction, just silence, just light. He closed his eyes, letting the wind wash against his face. For the first time since Clara died, he felt breath move through his ribs without pain, not sharp, not shallow, but deep, full, alive. Not because the grief was gone, but because he understood now. Some love does not end when the body does. Some presence does not leave when the door closes. Some miracles do not arrive to change fate, they arrive to change hearts. Behind him lay ashes, before him lay sunrise, and between them hoofprints in the snow. The days that followed unfolded gently, like pages turning themselves in a book left open by a window. Winter loosened its grip, snow softening beneath the growing warmth of the sun. The fields began to show hints of brown grass beneath melting drifts. Birds returned, cautious at first, testing the air that no longer tasted of storms. And Thomas changed, not in sudden leaps, but in quiet shifts. He began to fix the broken fences along the pasture line, replacing weathered posts with steady hands. He rebuilt the barn doors that winter wind had battered loose. He cleared the ash from the foundation where the house once stood, not to erase what happened, but to make room for what might come next. He kept the ring against his chest. He checked the horizon each morning at sunrise. He walked the path where the hoofprints had been. Every day he expected the snow to reveal them again. Every day he found only untouched white, and yet he did not feel abandoned. Not anymore. It was in the small things. The way the air carried a new stillness, lighter than before. The way silence no longer swallowed breath but held it. The way sleep came without nightmares. The way grief softened from a sharp blade into a gentle stone he could finally carry without bleeding. He spoke to Clara again, softly, not into emptiness but into presence. The barn became a chapel, the fields a sanctuary, the wind a quiet hymn. Love, he realized, did not disappear when a heartbeat stopped. It changed shape. It moved differently, it breathed differently, but it remained. Some mornings he swore he heard hoofbeats in the distance, faint, rhythmic, steady, echoing through the cold dawn air. He would step outside into the frost-glazed silence, watching the horizon burn gold beneath the rising sun, waiting for a shape to appear. Sometimes the wind shifted, brushing his coat the way a velvet muzzle might. Sometimes the air is filled with the scent of snow and cedar, Clara's favorite smell. Sometimes he felt a warmth at his shoulder, the pressure of steady weight, the way she would lean into him during storms when she was still alive. But he never turned to look, because some miracles are meant only to be felt, not witnessed twice. Spring has come. The ranch grew green again. Foals were born on neighboring land, their calls carrying across open valleys. Life returned in color. Thomas planted wildflowers around the burned foundation, not to cover the damage, but to honor the shape of what once stood. When they bloomed, they spread in soft colors of violet and white, swaying in the quiet breeze like fabric lifting in slow motion. He set a single stone at the center of the flowers, smooth river rock carved with careful hands. He carved 2 names into it, one on each side, Clara, and beneath it, Phoenix, because he understood now why the mare came. Not to be saved, but to save, not to stay, but to lead him back to himself, not to replace the love he lost, but to return him to a world that still held light. The world did not give him explanations. It gave him something better, the grace to continue. On the first morning of true spring, Thomas walked to the fence line before sunrise, breath fogging softly in the cool air. The sky was still dark, but the horizon glowed faint yellow beneath a thin ribbon of pink. Birds stirred in the branches, the fields shimmered with frost, and then faintly, so faintly it might have been imagination, hoofbeats. Slow, steady. Unhurried, he closed his eyes, letting sound become feeling, letting feelings become memories, letting memory become a blessing. When he opened them, the sun crested the horizon, brilliant, pure, unstoppable, painting the snow in gold and fire. In the light, he could almost see her, the white mare standing at the hill's edge, coat blazing in sunrise, mane lifting in wind, eyes filled with the quiet promise that had carried him through the darkest night. And then she was gone, not fading, not dissolving, just stepping beyond sight, the way the sun steps beyond the horizon when night begins. Hoofprints stretched in front of him again, crisp, distinct, leading east into the rising light. He did not follow, he smiled, for the first time in a very long time, and whispered into the wind, "Go." The wind answered with soft breath against his cheek. He turned toward the day, not away from the past, but forward with it, carrying grief not as weight, but as warmth. Carrying love not as an ache, but as a guide, because some hearts never leave us. They simply change form. They simply find new ways to lead us home. Some miracles arrive quietly, wearing shapes we do not expect. Some rescues happen in both directions. Some endings are really beginnings walking toward sunrise. And sometimes, when the world is coldest and the night is longest and we believe we have nothing left to give, love returns on 4 shaking legs, half frozen, waiting in the snow for us to choose life again.